Hello and welcome back to Fertility Talks, the Therapie Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Renee von Meding, and this season I'll be sitting down with none other than Medical Director of Therapie Fertility, Dr. John Kennedy. Each week we will be chatting all things fertility, trying to conceive, and much, much more. We hope that through this series, through honest conversation and information, we can strip away some of the stigma that sometimes comes hand in hand with infertility and fertility treatment in Ireland. So this week, I'm very excited to say that we're going to be discussing a topic very close to my heart. It's actually the reason I became so involved in the fertility world, and I know that John is also very excited about this topic. It is reciprocal IVF.
Absolutely. And I think everything we've done so far has just been a soft excuse for you to talk about this.
It's all been leading up to this.
And then we can cut it here.
I'm going to be like, I'm done.
Yeah, once we have this in the bag, it's fine.
So I suppose from a medical and fertility point of view, what is reciprocal IVF?
So the idea of reciprocal IVF, it's a variant of IVF that's going to be performed with a couple where you have two females. What's going to happen is you're going to stimulate and do standard IVF on one party. You're going to collect eggs. You're going to fertilize those eggs, usually with the addition of donor sperm, although that's something to be looked at. And then generating embryos and then transferring those embryos in a timely and safe fashion into the other member of the couple. So they carry their partner's genetic child. So
one person becomes the genetic parent and the other the gestational parent.
Exactly. And now Ireland's funny, you know this. It defines motherhood or being a mother as having a baby come out of you, exit you.
Physically.
Yes. Which is obviously somewhat antiquated as a notion. Very and much. doesn't take into account surrogacy and things and things like this. So one of the things we'll need to talk about is how parents are recognised, and certainly in Ireland, one party can be recognised as the mother and the other can be recognised as a parent.
Yeah. So why were you so excited to start offering this service?
Well, it's just elegant, I think. It's sort of clever, and I mean, so everything I say here today has to be put through the lens of the cis hetero white male, you know, but whenever you have a female couple in front of you, generally a lot of the time they'll have an idea that I want to get pregnant and my partner doesn't want to get pregnant or something like that. But always at the back of your mind, you're thinking, I've got potentially 2 bites of the cherry here.
Yeah.
You know, if I can get this unit a child or children, then that's success. And if it's not working out over here, then I've got a plan B. And you have 2 sets of ovaries and you have 2 uteruses. And the couple are sharing the journey. And I've always felt that donor sperm for a heterosexual couple, I think they do very well with it. I think guys do really, really well when they have to use donor sperm. That would certainly be my experience. But it always feels like a bit of a mean trick. Like they're very divorced from the proceedings. They're divorced from the proceedings genetically, and their support and all the rest.
But they don't physically have to do anything.
Exactly. And I imagine it must be somewhat similar for same-sex female couples who are using donor sperm, that the person who gets pregnant and the person who carries the child and the person who gives birth is mum and the other one is mum's partner. You know?
It can feel like that, absolutely, yeah.
And this is a really elegant way of completely sharing the journey and mixing all of that in, and the nature and the nurture, and it's just, when it works, it's really, really elegant.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very pretty.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about when I first heard about reciprocal IVF. It was when my wife and I had started talking about wanting to do some form of fertility treatment, and we knew we would have to use donor sperm, and it would be like IVF or IUI. We didn't really know what that actually meant at the time. These were just phrases that were thrown around. Yep. And we were actually having a glass of wine or something one night, and we said, wouldn't it be so cool if because I knew I wanted to be physically pregnant, but we said, wouldn't it be great if we could use your eggs, Audrey, and have embryos, and then I could carry them, because that way we'd both really physically be involved in this process. Yeah. And we were like, that sounds like really bizarre. And then we Googled it, and sure enough, it was a thing called reciprocal IVF. But it was relatively new. So 2009 in Spain, I believe, was when they first started offering it. So in the scheme of things, it's not too long that it's been offered.
No, not at all. And I mean, there's nothing challenging about it medically versus conventional IVF. It's just the same. I mean, the process is identical. It's just decoupled a little bit.
Yeah.
And you take eggs, you take sperm, you make embryos, you do embryo transfers.
Yeah.
It's, so aside from that, there's obviously a lot of paperwork and checking, and even still a lot of the systems that are in place for the monitoring and assessment of the of cycles struggle a little bit with the idea that two females could co-own embryos.
And is that just in Ireland? We're kind of struggling with that
I think it's the nature of the software systems and the like. It's okay, who owns these embryos, and they have to be assigned to somebody. They can't really be. I haven't seen a system where the embryos are assigned to a couple. So traditionally, the embryos would be assigned to whoever's eggs they came from.
So the female in a heterosexual couple.
Exactly. Right? Or if it was a known donation, a known egg donor cycle, then the embryos would be assigned to the person who was going to take ownership of the embryos totally.
Sure.
But for reciprocal IVF, the embryos are very much owned by the couple jointly and can be dispersed of and transferred between that couple as and when they want. So what you do, you can't put the embryos. The system won't let you have them both on them.
Computer says no.
you have to put them all on this side, and then, okay, but she's going to do the transfer, so I'll just take one and put it over there, or do we put them all over?
Yeah.
It's just a little logistics exercise for us in the background. The consent forms in this are ridiculously clear.
Yeah.
The embryos are owned by the couple jointly and cannot be used without the express consent of both parties.
Yeah. I mean, when the licenses finally came into the Irish clinics, that was 2019, I believe?
2018, 2019 in around.
I believe it was 2019.
Well, you'd know better.
And the reason I think this is because our youngest daughter was 8 months old at the time when I heard. I got lots of people messaging me and being like, oh my God, did you hear that reciprocal IVF, you can do it in Ireland now? And obviously we had gone abroad, we had done this whole thing. And I was a little bit pissed, to be honest, when I heard, because I was like, well, we've gone to all this trouble of going abroad and now you can just get it done here. But you know what? That was quickly followed by immense joy at the opportunity for so many people to experience this treatment in Ireland and not have to travel.
Exactly. And I think the clinic started doing it before the legislation had caught up, if you follow me, because the CFRA, Child and Family Relations Act, didn't come into being until May 2020, I want to say.
Absolutely.
So it preempted that. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring it in was I wanted to get ahead of it a little bit. We have a terrible tendency, maybe in medicine or maybe in all areas in Ireland, if it's not up in our face, we go, it's not a real thing. So when I was trying to get reciprocal IVF up and running in fertility clinics, I was constantly met with, nobody wants this. You are going to put a lot of time and effort into making a product, as it were, as some kind of thing that people just don't want because they aren't telling us they want it. And I was like, this sounds a lot like we're not asking.
I would love to know who those people were. And I would like to turn around to those people and just point out that, isn't a huge amount of the people coming into therapy now looking for reciprocal IVF? That's a huge portion.
But of course. It was obvious to me that that's a thing. And it was clearly obvious. No, look, when you don't offer something or when something is just not available, people reconcile themselves to that. And
Yeah.
if they attend you, then they won't ask about it
Yeah.
because it's very clear, or else they'll go to Spain or what have you, or something like that. So it's very easy to convince yourself that there's no desire.
There's no demand for it,
this.
yeah.
There's no desire, there's no demand. And I mean, I think we're even seeing this now with things like known sperm donation,
Yeah.
or new ways, blended families, and new
Oh,
ways
totally.
of,
Like a lot of people would say, oh, there's no demand for known sperm donation. And I can tell you categorically that is not true.
But of course there is. And I
Yeah.
think that there's clever ways of fudging that. You can kind of do it and do it through clinics and all this. I'm not saying you should, but there's ways you can do that. But we have to challenge our own biases, our implicit biases that we don't even know we're carrying. And we have to be willing to throw it out there and throw up the flagpole, see who salutes it, sort of thing. And if there's no demand for something, fine.
Yeah.
But I suspect that reciprocal IVF, it's not even that an awful lot of couples want to do reciprocal IVF. I think the even wider portion is people who want it to be an option.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
and they like the idea. I mean, I would still see a number of female couples who are coming in who are very, very clear, no, we're just on track one here.
Yep.
My partner isn't interested and doesn't want to engage, and that's great.
Yeah.
That's fine. And even then, sometimes when you start talking about it, it's like, okay, look, how do we do this? It's something. Is it something we can explore? It's just great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great having options for people now going forward. Let's talk about language a bit, because when it, I suppose, first started getting marketed in Ireland, it was very much marketed as shared motherhood. Mm-hmm. And while I understand it, I understand that phrase, and I even used that phrase myself many years ago, because it's, sharing this journey. It's a little bit problematic for me.
Please.
And I suppose it's because it very much genders it in one sense. And it very much says that both people going through this are mothers. And I have lots of friends who very much do not identify with the idea of being a mother. They identify with, being a parent. And it kind of pushes everybody into that box on one hand. And then on the other hand, it kind of implies in a way that people, like a same-sex female couple who doesn't do reciprocal IVF or shared motherhood, if they do a standard IUI with donor sperm, that somehow they're not both sharing that journey to motherhood. They're not both mothers. And I don't know. So for many reasons, it irks me a little bit. And I just would prefer that we use the actual name. Which is reciprocal IVF.
Reciprocal IVF. Yeah, and that's our preferred terminology. We played around with the idea of shared parenthood for a while.
I think it just gets a bit confusing then, because it's like, well, isn't it all shared parenthood if you're going into it with a partner?
Yes.
No matter what way you do it, no matter if you're a heterosexual couple, you're non-binary, it doesn't matter. Like, it's all shared parenthood, right?
Yep.
So that, it would just be a bit confusing.
And I think it goes back to implicit bias. I think it goes back to our history, culturally, and what we're bringing to the table and challenging those things. What am I thinking of? When we started doing our consent forms, this was really interesting. There's loads of different ones to cover loads of different things, and the labels on them. So we had an IVF consent. A traditional IVF consent is a document made for a heterosexual couple. That is the default. IVF consent. There's a place for her, there's a place for him, there's a place where he signs things about sperm, there's a place where she signs things about eggs, there's a place where they both sign things about embryos.
Yep.
And so we're starting that. I suddenly realized, well, hang on. If I make IVF consent a default couple thing, for starters, am I gendering that? Okay. And secondly, what am I going to then call the consent form for a woman who's just going through without a partner?
Sure.
With donor sperm? Am I going to call that IVF consent for single woman? Well, I'm obviously not going to do that because that's horrific. So don't do that. And then I had a little kind of moment of clarity. I was like, hang on a minute. The default has to be what the thing is. So the default consent is an IVF ICSI consent. And if you are going through without a partner and you're using donor sperm, it's ICSI, IVF ICSI with donor sperm. If you're a couple, it's IVF ICSI couple. And if you're a couple using donor sperm, it's IVF ICSI couple using donor sperm. And it completely removes gender from it.
Yep.
And that's, I think, at the heart of your difficulties, perhaps, with shared motherhood, is that it's a gender.
Yeah.
It's a genderized word in there, and you're trying to move away from that. Now, I am absolutely on board with that. I do struggle a little with, given the field I work in. I work with ovaries, and I work with testes, and I work with sperm, and I work with eggs. But even as we're talking, I'm trying to check myself for use of language. I remember talking to you about this before. I used to always say lesbian, a lesbian couple, and I've been educated. Thank you for this. On that is not always the case.
Yeah, a lot of times it is, but not always.
Not always, exactly correct. And they've been good enough not to correct me, or and that's fine. But as we learn, as we grow, and trying to use the correct terminology, I do think reciprocal IVF is a better way of calling it, and that's certainly what we would be adopting going forward, and trying to avoid, certainly when it comes to referencing parentage, trying perhaps to avoid, and this is a real uphill struggle, trying to avoid gender roles within that.
Yeah, for sure, because I think that's the way things are moving. And it's hard, I suppose, especially in the fertility field, in the parenting world. It's very traditionally gendered. But I think the more we can kind of just move away from that. And
when you got married, did you refer to yourselves as brides, both of you, or
we did? We did, because to us that was very much what we were.
Yes,
we both had big white dresses. I was actually pregnant, getting married.
My wife was pregnant too. Function disorganization.
Sinners.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I mean, you were long gone before
I was
that.
long gone. Long gone. Okay, so let's go back and actually talk about the process of reciprocal IVF, because we're kind of assuming that people know what that process is. And
they don't. So we tried to be quite metric about it. So the couple come in, they want to do reciprocal IVF, and you could make an argument. You could make a quite good argument, actually, that the testing pathways should be different for both parties, because one is going to be, and for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to refer to recipient and donor.
Yep.
The donor is the person who
giving the eggs,
who is being stimulated and providing eggs. The recipient is the one who's going to be in receipt of the embryo transfer. Yep. So you would think, right, that what we need to do here is different. We care about the ovarian reserve and the egg quality over here. We care about the uterus and the ability to carry over there. And there should be a clear demarcation. Honestly, under ideal circumstances, I'm willing to flex. But what I would always recommend is that both members, both partners, do the standard suite of investigations. Because you might come in with an idea that you're going to be the donor and you're going to be the recipient, but it's a lot easier to get as much data you can about the couple's fertility potential as individuals and as a couple before you start on anything. So I generally recommend. And
why is that? Is that like if you run into trouble down, like, if you start one way, say, and you're stimulating one person's ovaries, and then
it's not even that. Suppose I have you and Audrey, and you decide, you come in and you go, Audrey definitely wants to provide the eggs, and I definitely want to be the carrier.
Which is exactly what we did.
I know, but we definitely want to. I go, okay, well, we're just going to do that. We're going to blind ourselves. We're going to put our blinkers on. We're going to go for it, and then we realize that Audrey has very few eggs. And then we realize that you have a huge fibroid in your uterus or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And you kind of, blast. It turns out, actually, wow.
That's going to be very difficult.
That's going to present, not potentially very difficult, but it's going to present challenges and extra work. And it actually turns out that you've got an astonishingly high ovarian reserve. Yeah. And, is there... And then you start asking the question, you might ask the question to start, is there any flexibility in this?
Yeah.
And you'd be told, no, there's no flexibility in this. We are locked into this. And then you get told, well, if you do it this way, you've got a 20% chance of having a baby. And if you do it this way, you've got a 60% chance of having a baby. Are you still locked in?
Suddenly there might be some flexibility there.
Exactly. Yeah. And you make assumptions. You make assumptions based on people's desires. You make assumptions based on people's age and history. And those assumptions aren't always correct. So what you should do before you embark on something as big and difficult and time-consuming and labour-intensive as reciprocal IVF, get the data.
Yeah.
Check out the womb on both parties. Do an ovarian reserve test on both parties. They're not massively expensive tests. I'm pretty sure they're not free, but they're not massively expensive. We hope that these findings support what you wanted to do
in the first place,
or don't skew things too badly. And it's rare that I would. The example I gave is obviously hyperbolic, but it's rare that you would be in a situation where you go, you can't. That's exaggerated. But you might manage expectations slightly differently. Frequently, a couple would come in and you would automatically, instinctively think, oh, the younger party is going to be the donor here. But they'd say, actually, no, we want to go the other way because we know, you get it straight away. We know time is a huge factor here, so we want to do this and we've got a bit of time to play with over here. And you go, that does make sense. But then you need to have that conversation. You know that this is difficult and you know that your chance of success might be a little bit different if you went the other way and what's your end goal. And of course, most people still stick with their plan, but it's really critically important to have those conversations.
And I suppose the more information you have, the more comfortable you can be with whatever decision you make in the end.
The more you know, the old PSAs,
Okay, so at that point, let's say you've done the testing.
Yep.
You've decided who's going to be the donor, who's going to be the recipient. At that point, do you choose your sperm donor, or?
So you do your implications counselling. You never did implications counselling, did you?
Maybe that's why we're so screwed.
You never did your sanity test. How do you think you would have fared? No. Look,
we've done lots of other things.
Twice today, I had to reassure people that implications counselling, which was a requirement for us,
and it's included in the reciprocal IVF.
It is absolutely is not a sanity check. Nobody's getting turned away.
And it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's information gathering.
It's a chat about using donor sperm.
Thank you.
And I think that can only be a good thing.
Yep.
Obviously we have donor conceived children. We have lots of friends with donor conceived children, and it's a different way to have your children, and there are things that it brings up for you, potentially for your children in the future, for your friends and family. So it's important to understand the implications of using donor sperm.
I remember one case I was involved in years ago, kind of digressing a little bit. It was a woman who wanted to get pregnant. And she'd gone through a few cycles. They hadn't worked, and I was recommending donor egg. And she was very open to the notion. We were talking it out, and she just started in consult. She got upset one day, and when I probed into it, she said, "No, it's just so stupid." It might be stupid. Come on, what's going on? Historically, the members of her family had one, I think it was the third or their fourth toe that was a little bit shorter. And she... And this was a loss for her. Yeah, and this was about her tribe and her legacy. I got it. I respect that. It might sound mad, but I really do buy into that. So the notion that these are things you need to explore when you bring an external tribe genetic matrix into the mix. How are you going to feel about that? If you see behaviors which are different to what you would have expected from your family members, are you going to ascribe that to you probably are, because we're all conversational, but of course it's not that. It's nature, nurture, all the rest of those things. But those are really, really important things to explore and to chat about before you get started. So you have to do that. Then you got to order your donor sperm. We're working with a sperm bank where there are pregnancy slots. So
what does that mean?
So that means you upfront grab a pregnancy slot. Pay a sum of money for that. If you never get pregnant or you decide to give out that pregnancy slot, you get your money back on that. That pregnancy slot means that when you pick a donor, that donor will not be used for more than the generation of 3 families within Ireland.
Okay, so even if they're providing to other clinics, they will not give to other clinics.
Exactly. Yeah. They're pregnant. They control essentially their own pregnancy slots. So I don't quite know how necessary that is. These donors are all identifiable now. So the child, not you, but the child can find out who the donor is when they're 18 years old. So there's no real risk of consanguinity or marrying your half sister or half brother or anything like that. But it is nice to have that reassurance that there aren't hordes of children running around. So you have your pregnancy slot. You pick your donor sperm from the range.
Here's a question about the donor sperm.
Yeah.
Is there anything medically speaking that would rule a donor out? Like, does there have to be like a match with egg and sperm?
No,
or?
there doesn't need to be a match with blood type. The two questions you get asked most commonly is, does there need to be a blood type match? The answer is no, there doesn't. The other question you get asked is about a thing called Cmv Cytomegalovirus, which is a virus that if pregnant women can contract, anybody can contract, but not in pregnancy, it can have severe consequences for the pregnancy. In the UK, they screen donors and recipients for CMV. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no reported case of a transfer of CMV into a pregnancy from a CMV positive donor into a CMV negative recipient. So it's purely theoretical. It's never actually happened. And I do not encourage testing for CMV. I don't think you need to be worried about, but it's something people often ask about.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a factor. I think you can go ahead with a CMV positive donor, even if you're CMV negative yourself. After that, all the donors have to sign up to the Irish registry system, which is to say that they're giving permission for the treating clinics to pass their details on to the Department of Health, who will retain their information for the child to access when they're 18 years old.
Okay, so other than that, you kind of just get a list and you go on and...
It's all online, and you see your list of donors, you get some extra information about education and background and personality, and then you pick your donor. It's
okay.
Tell me about that. What?
I suppose the process
Spain,
was
so it was a bit
different for us. It kind of, our donor essentially got picked for us, which I know does happen quite frequently in clinics, whereas this process, I suppose, puts the power back into the hands of whoever's using it, which I think it's kind of a nicer system.
Yes.
Our donor is we're happy out, like we love our kids, and if we didn't have although I will say that anytime anything happens that we don't like, we just say, it's the donor.
That's definitely not to do with
definitely
you.
Definitely not.
You two unfit parents. No, not at all.
But yeah, so we didn't really have much involvement in the process of that, but I feel like this process is going to be much more...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So generally you would only get enough sperm for one round. You don't need to buy piles of it. You can reserve some more.
It comes in a straw, right?
It comes in a straw. That straw could be used for either IUI or IVF or ICSI. Traditionally, we're going to be doing IVF with it here. So you get your one straw, you do your implication testing, that sperm gets moved from Denmark, which is where the sperm bank is, over to us. And then we undertake a cycle. So we would stimulate the donor with an IVF cycle, your 2 weeks of injections to grow the follicles. We then do an egg collection under sedation. We take those eggs out. Procedure that takes about 10, 15 minutes, not long, usually very well tolerated. And then we would thaw that donor sperm and fertilize, leave the eggs and the sperm together. We then grow the embryos out for 5 days. And at day 5 or day 6, but usually day 5, we would then freeze the embryos.
Okay, so this is a question. So what we're doing is a freeze-all cycle. So what does that mean?
So that means we're freezing the embryos. There's 2 ways of doing reciprocal IVF. There's trying to synchronize the cycle. So around the same time as you're stimulating the donor, you're also preparing the womb of the recipient with a different medication regime with estrogen and progesterone. So that when the embryo gets to day 5, then you do a fresh implantation into the recipient and then freeze any surplus embryos. That's nice in some ways. I'm not totally against it. It's a bit of a holdover from a time when the freezing and thawing wasn't really, really robust, which it is now. Now the thaw survival rate's 98, 99%, if not even higher. So embryos thaw and freeze really, really well. Synchronizing the two cycles can be challenging. If the dates don't work out, you can go a little bit sideways. You don't want to compromise things. And also, there is also, it's not common, but the possibility that the cycle will not result in any embryos. That for whatever reason, the eggs won't fertilize normally or the embryos won't develop normally, and there's no embryo for transfer.
And then you've already started the recipient on
You've
medication.
medicated somebody for a transfer that's never going to happen. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here with our program is we're going to freeze all the embryos, and then when we know that, we're not going to delay at that point, but then we're in a position to have a coherent conversation about, okay, now we're ready to go. Now we're going to do that. Yeah. And I also think it affords the couple the opportunity to have more information before they undertake the treatment cycle that's actually going to try to result in a pregnancy. And so maybe if there's a higher number than anticipated of embryos, it might change how they approach things, or if there's a lower, it might change things. So just as we were talking about earlier, knowledge is power. You get more information, you can make more coherent decisions with that, as opposed to on the day being told, there's one embryo there, we've got another two, we don't know how they're going to go, we're going to keep an eye on them for another few hours. Yeah. It's rushed. Yeah. And that's just a little bit suboptimal. The freezing is very strong, so it affords us the opportunity to do things in a slightly gentler, slower fashion.
Yeah. And I believe there's some clinics in the States now that only do freeze all cycles.
For fresh cycles, absolutely. Yeah. Now, the logic on that is that there's a theory that the stimulation of the ovaries can have an impact on the womb. It's still a little controversial, but there's some data there. That's not a situation that we need to worry about here because that womb isn't been stimulated. So you don't have quite that. I think a lot of the drive for synchronized cycles came from the fact that reciprocal IVF was happening abroad. Yeah. So it was one less
totally. We like for us, it just had to all happen at once.
Yes.
But I can attest to the fact that it was incredibly stressful trying to sync up cycles and not know if there was going to be anything to transfer, and it was just like we were just lucky,
Yeah, and I think it's less. And I mean, with the best will in the world, the medications have side effects, and a lot of the time when you're going through something, it's really nice to have somebody there to help support you through it, as opposed to somebody who's also going through their own thing, which might be a little bit different. And well, I don't know. I can't speak to the conversation. I'm on all these injections. Oh, I'm on tablets. You're already on tablets. You're not on injections.
I was on injections too.
Were you?
Yeah, I definitely. Well, maybe it was just the very towards the transfer I was on something. I can't even remember what it was.
Yeah, you weren't on the same. Yeah,
it wasn't the same. It wasn't the Gonal-F.
Wish Audrey was here. She would have a very, very different. Now, there's no question that the person
I had to be pregnant.
Exactly. Okay, so you're doing the heavy lifting. I know. But just for that brief period when you're traveling and all the rest, it creates a lot of additional stresses and pressures. So,
yeah, for sure.
So taking a step back, the other thing that you need to do that's a little bit different from conventional IVF is, and we're hoping this will change. At the moment, the legislation clearly says that if you are doing reciprocal IVF, one party is a donor and the other is a recipient. Now, we screen everybody for HIV and hepatitis. In order to bring samples into the lab, we have to. But the screening requirements for a donor are higher. You need to do additional HIV and hepatitis screening to make sure that there's no recent infection or anything. It seems absolutely bananas to me that you can't recognize these people as a couple who are intimate, who, if there is it's being transferred back and forth anyway, if there is in the vanishingly rare situation where there is a viral disease of some description. So I'd love to see that changed. I would love to see these...
What does that happen if a husband or male partner is giving sperm to his female partner?
No.
So why is why is that not treated as donor?
Because it's eggs going from a female to a female. So they treat you functionally as if you were a donor from a different country. Yeah. You have to be screened to the same standard.
But are those gametes different? Do they behave differently?
Oh God, no. No.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
Yeah.
And we're hoping it'll change. And there is talk about it changing. But
so does that just mean that there's a higher level of testing involved?
There's a whole bunch of additional blood test screens. And one thing we've tried to do, we've built that into the cost of the program.
And is that why the cost is slightly higher than it would be with
it's one of
IVF?
It's one of the major reasons why the cost is slightly higher, yes. Absolutely.
Let's talk about that, because I know that some people maybe would be thinking of doing like just a standard IVF cycle, and down the line they might think, oh, well now, you know, like we did IVF, used my own eggs, had a baby, we have embryos. Now my wife or my partner or whoever would like to use them, but because of the testing... That's really important.
If we didn't do the viral testing at the start, then it's not technically impossible. It's not something we're doing.
Okay.
And one thing I would urge people who are considering reciprocal IVF at all to do is, if you think it's on the cards, go hard at it from the start.
Yeah.
Give yourself that opportunity, okay? And just do it properly and formally right from the outset. If you're sure it's something you don't want to do, fine. No harm, no foul. We'll do straight IVF or whatever you call it. Standard.
That's like a really bad joke.
Boom, boom. But we can do a more standard cycle. But if you think at any point that you might want to think about it, you can future-proof it by doing it. And then hopefully in the fullness of time, those donor screening requirements will fall off, and we'll be able to treat these people as normal couples.
As you would with anyone else.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know this is like how long is a piece of string, but do you have any indication of like success rates of reciprocal IVF? Is it lower than it would be with IVF?
No, I would say overall it's probably higher. Because
why would that be?
Dealing with younger people.
Yeah.
As a general rule, when you've got heterosexual fertility, for most people, there's a natural delay between starting your family and realizing you're going to need assistance.
Because usually they've been trying for a while.
Well, they've decided, aged X, we want to have a family now. Then they try for, depending on their age and circumstances, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and eventually they make their way through whatever all over the shop system there is. Do they go to their GP? Do they start talking to friends? Do they go and see an acupuncturist? There's a million different routes that will eventually feed into formal fertility treatment. Female couples don't have that.
Yeah, because they well...
There's conversations, but you're not going to get pregnant until you do something formal and fertility based.
For all the trying in the world.
Well, wish in one hand and so on and so forth. So straight away you've saved yourself potentially a year or two. Okay?
Yeah.
So you've got that. Is it a slightly younger demographic? I suppose maybe not. I think it's probably in and around, otherwise give or take the same age. And the final piece, just like I said earlier, you've got 2 bites at the cherry. Yeah,
so even if you do find that maybe someone has some subfertility issues, you still have another whole person
to have a go with. So overall the success rates would probably be a little bit higher than for conventional IVF.
And what does that mean? Like, does that mean that it would, be likely that someone might have a baby with their first cycle and some frozen embryos?
I think you need to be very clear when you say cycle, what that means. Yeah. So the standard line is, if I can do a stimulation cycle and generate 3 embryos, the fastest way to get you pregnant, put all 3 embryos back in together. Yeah. But of course, I'm not going to do that. We want to transfer 1 at a time because that's the safe and responsible thing to do. At a push 2 at a time. We've been around that already. So you have to think cumulatively. So if I've got somebody who's, say, 30 years old and has a really good ovarian reserve and there's no other problems at all, realistically, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I could get 3 or 4 embryos out of that, potentially. Yeah. Maybe not, but it's not an unrealistic expectation. Each of those embryos might have a 30 to 35% chance of giving you a baby, so that accumulates. Maybe you've got a 60 to 70% chance of a live birth from that completed cycle altogether. Yeah. Now, add 10 years. Yeah. Results are still okay. I would say cumulatively you're probably looking at 15, 20, 25% maximally. Yeah. Depending on the numbers.
So as always, infertility age does play a factor.
And I think that's really important to understand, because it's that old axiom: when you have a woman come in looking to access treatment with donor sperm, either with or without a partner, they are not so much patients as they are clients. Now, clients is not a word I particularly like, but that's probably showing my vintage as well. But I do think in this context, it is more appropriate. They are looking for service acquisition. They're looking for technical help and expertise, you know? And that should skew the odds and change the position. There's no history of subfertility and all those other things. But it's still a hard old road to go down. So it's really important to do the standard testing in the first instance, even if you're kind of, why do I have to do this? I know that, why would there be a problem here? Why do you think there might be a problem with my womb? Other people are getting pregnant all the time out there and you're not checking their wombs. Well, that's true, but they're also not paying $1,000 for donor sperm. You know?
So you want to be sure when you're, you know,
exactly.
The stakes are higher that you're giving yourself the best shot, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of just to finish up, something I'm sure that people ask a lot coming to the clinic is about like the legalities.
So, and
what's going to happen when a child is born.
So when you go through, we have legislation, the Child Family Relationships Act of 2015, which was enacted in May 2020, but don't worry about that.
Don't worry about the 5-year delay.
Yeah. That means that when you come through, both parties sign a consent form saying they are going to both be parents.
And this is
the treatment.
For any treatments?
Any treatment using donor egg or donor sperm.
In Ireland?
Yes.
And the child is born in Ireland?
And the child is born in Ireland. So everything happens in Ireland. We can come back to that. Then when you have the child, you sign another form, a Declaration of Parentage, SI 546. And at that point, well, at all points through it, your details are given to the Department of Health. It's not an ideal situation. It's not one we're particularly happy about. Irrespective of whether or not the treatment is successful or not, your details are given to the Department of Health. It's a legal requirement. And that means that they then go on the register. And that means your child can then access the register to find out who the donor is and get the donor details when they're 18 years old. It also suggests that maybe, and we don't know exactly what form this will take, that if the child requests a copy of their birth cert when they're 18 years old, they will be told there is additional information, and that additional information was that they were conceived with the aid of donor gametes, and the information on that donor can be found in.
And that possibly would be something that would affect more heterosexual couples, because obviously if you have a same-sex female couple, obviously any child is going to know that there was a donor involved, but sometimes with heterosexual couples, that information is not always disclosed.
This is a problem. Yes. Because, I mean, while we absolutely encourage couples to disclose that donor sperm or donor egg were used, and there's good data that says that's better, I still think it's a parental responsibility and right to do so, and I don't think the state should have a hand actor part.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's very important to disclose all the information to your children, but at the same time, I don't think that should be
your decision to make for them,
for someone else, and it's not something that should just happen at the age of 18. Imagine the shock.
Yeah, So, as you said, that is provided everything happens within Ireland
and in a clinic.
So
anyone coming for reciprocal IVF will automatically both be parents.
Yes.
So this is the thing though. The person who gives birth can be listed as the mother, because this is all to do with the Irish Constitution. A person who has a child exit their body is called a mother. So you can either go down on the birth cert as a mother, but you also have the option now to be called parent 1. And then the second parent, who is in the case of reciprocal IVF, the donor, cannot also be called the mother, because again, under our constitution, there cannot be two mothers. So the donor parent will be called parent 2, essentially, or just parent if the other parent is being called mother. So I guess it's a step in the right direction, and that piece of legislation, allows for this to happen. Whereas if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, we would have said, well, no, only the recipient or the person who gives birth is going to be on the birth certificate, and the other a legal stranger. So, things have changed a lot.
The other thing I would really like to see happen is I would like to see that kind of matrix be applied retrospectively. to female couples who had children, not necessarily through reciprocal IVF, through standard IVF, but they're a couple and they both want to be on the birth cert.
Yeah, so I suppose there is, there are some amnesties, depending on what way you did it, and if you used an Irish clinic, if you used an anonymous donor, so there are some amnesties there, but for the most part, I suppose the Irish government have tried to make it as paint by numbers as possible. So it's what's the easiest way to legislate for this?
Yeah.
Irish clinic, child born in Ireland, donor registry.
Done.
There you go, done.
Yeah.
And we know that in reality, families are created in many, many, many other ways that don't always involve a fertility clinic. And again, that should be people's right and prerogative to choose how they want to build their family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you can think that even if you're not the father, it's a matter of simplicity itself if all the parties want to go into hospital and say you are, and nobody's checking that.
Oh, John, I could have brought you into the registry office and said, put this guy on the birth cert.
I would have said,
and they
not this guy again, but, otherwise.
But I could have.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't put my wife, who was their biological or genetic parent,
Yes.
So it's bizarre. But thankfully things are
improving.
It's improving, yeah.
It's going in the right direction.
And it's great news for people who now want to think about starting their families.
Exactly. Going forward.
So thanks so much for chatting, as always, on my favourite topic, reciprocal IVF.
You've done great work.
I'll get a tattoo.
And look, just for everybody out there, if you're listening, if there is one person who has championed this space more than any other in the country, it's Renee. For years I've been talking to you about this, and I hope that the community recognises what you've done, and how instrumental you were in getting that across the line and getting it enacted and just making things better. So well done you.
Thanks, John.